Hello, everyone. Today, September 21st, 2020, we will be discussing the news lead. Now, what is a news lead? A news lead is the opening to your news story, and the lead contains the most important information of the story. Now, if it becomes at the very beginning, I want you to compare it to, say, an English book, say a novel that you're reading for English, where when we study the beginning of a novel in English, we see that the beginning of the novel has the characters listed out for us, and it might tell us the setting, but other than that, it doesn't tell us too much. The story unfolds naturally over the course of the pages. But that's not the case in journalism. In journalism, we want to go ahead and get all the spoilers out early. We want to know who wins the ball game. We want to know what the big feature is for the latest tech device. We want to know, the largest fish caught at the fishing competition, whatever the case may be. Whatever the big spoiler is, go ahead and get it out early. The reason why is because most readers don't bother reading past the lead. And so you want to grab their attention, tell them everything that you can immediately, but you want to do so in such a way that hooks them. See how the lead should hook the readers and make them interested in the story. I want you to think about something that has probably happened to you several times. How many of you use Twitter? And how many of you use Facebook? And particularly, how many of you use or at least are familiar with both? Now, say that you have 1 minute to read a social media post. Would you rather spend that 1 minute reading a tweet or a post on Facebook that has 3 or 4 paragraphs, pushing 1,000 words, droning on and on and on and on? You'd probably pick the tweet. Most people would. And this is why our news headlines have to be or not just the headlines, but our news leads, the headlines and the leads, which are two separate things. This is why our leads need to be as attention-grabbing and attention-holding as possible. Now, the most important facts are detailed in the 5 W's and the 1 H, and I'm sure you remember what these 6 questions are. We have the who the story is about, the what the story is about, the where the story takes place, not necessarily where you as a journalist wrote the story, but where the story itself takes place. When, same idea, not necessarily when you wrote it, but when the story itself takes place. Why, what's the reason for this event happening, and how did this event happen? Now, the lead in a story will contain these 4 questions. It only contains 4. And that's because, again, a newspaper paragraph, a paragraph in a news article, is only going to be between 1 and 2 sentences long. The whole paragraph, 1 and 2 sentences. Maybe 3, depending on the particular type of newspaper and what's being discussed. But most newspaper paragraphs are only going to be 1 and 2 sentences in length, which means you have a lot to try to fit into 1 sentence, but you don't want to make so big of a sentence as to bore or bog down your readers. So that means that some things just have to be cut. And in this case, the why and the how are typically cut from a news lead. But that still leaves you who, what, where, and when. Now, they're vital, and yet they don't need that much explanation. For instance, and then of course we leave the why and the how for later on in the story. So, for instance, if we have a story, if our who So we have a who, a what, a where, and a when. Now, we might see this kind of setup. We might say who being our students. Let's treat this almost like a Mad Lib. So we have students. And what, let's say that they're dressed in, costume. Where? Well, they're at Charles Henderson Middle School. And when? Let's say September 21st. So if this is our who, what, where, and our when, then we might have a story, a news lead that reads, on September 21st, 2020, students at CHMS were spotted walking in to school in funny outfits. On September 21st, students at Charles Henderson Middle School were spotted walking into school in funny outfits. Now, let's go back. We have our who, we have our what, we have our where, and we have our when. The only thing we're missing is how and why. And again, think back to our earlier lesson on these 6 questions. You might not always get all 6 questions answered in a news story, but you could certainly get most of them. Because we might say in a later segment, in a later paragraph, the students dressed up to celebrate. Does anybody know why some students might be dressing up in costumes coming to school today? If you said homecoming, you would be correct. Of course, in news, we wouldn't put the exclamation point. We would say the students dressed up to celebrate homecoming. And then we might get an interview or a quote from a student, probably several students, asking about what they're wearing. We might get a quote from Mr. Brown or Dr. Roberts to help get a feel for why we're celebrating homecoming, why we're celebrating the way that we are, and what the particular themes are for each day. However, I want to re-emphasize that once our lead, which is on September 21st, 2020, students at Charles Henderson Middle School were spotted walking into school in funny outfits, then we have our secondary information, our why and our how. Now, the why and the how provide readers with important information, but these details might take more words to describe accurately and effectively. So, we will leave the why and the how for the paragraph or paragraphs after the lead. It might take 2 or 3 paragraphs to fully explain why students are dressing up in costumes. Now, we see the shape here, an inverted pyramid. Well, let me ask you guys something. Why would we have a pyramid upside down? What's the most important portion of a pyramid? Would it be what normally would be the top part, the middle part, or the bottom? Well, it would normally be the bottom. The bottom is typically our base, and it is our foundation. In journalism, we operate with an inverted pyramid because our foundation and our base is the most important, But when we're reading, we want to make sure that it is at the very front. It is at the very top of the news story. And that will be where our lead is. It is our who, our what, our where, and our when. Then, in the middle, we can start adding in the supporting details that are still important, such as our why and our how. And then finally, we will finish our news story by adding in quotes and other important facts and details, and ultimately close with a tale that tells us one final bit of information. Now, we have a very real homework assignment for tonight. I would like for you to find 3 news stories from the internet or from print media sources. So if you'd like to use a regular newspaper, an old school style newspaper, you're more than welcome to. I would like you to copy the hyperlink, or if you find a print version, if you will take a picture of it and upload that picture and send that picture to me as well. But go ahead and read the entire article, and then I want you to write down the story's lead in its entirety to get some practice, and then write down and specify the who, the what, the where, and the when. And there is a Schoology assessment for you to upload all 3 of these. Also, don't forget that you will have a blog post due at the end of this week. It will be due Sunday. And if you have any other questions, I would be more than happy to help answer them. So I hope you all have a wonderful day and happy homecoming.